All right, welcome to the review video for New Testament Survey quiz number 1. I hope that you will take time to watch this video several times and watch it well before the class actually happens. All right, this quiz will happen first period when we get into the class. And so let me start by going over what kind of questions you will experience on the quiz, and then we will give you a little quick review over that. All right. First section is going to be a short answer section. There's going to be just a few short answer questions, probably the hardest part of the quiz there, just because you have to supply the answer. The next section will be a multiple choice section, and so you'll have an A, B, C, or D choice. All right, so the right answer is there. You just have to figure out which it is. All right, and then there are two matching sections on the quiz. The first matching section will deal with the different religious groups that were operating in the New Testament. We're talking like scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, all the different groups that we talked about. The second one will deal with the Gospels, and you will literally just have Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and you have to tell me different, you'll have to match up different things that are true about that book. There is one essay question, which we spent quite a little bit of time talking about, so I hope you'll do well on that essay question. It is a paragraph, so you will need to make sure that you write it in paragraph form, all right, not bullets or anything like that. And it is worth 15 points, all right, so you definitely want to think about different major discussions that we had. And there is also one bonus question on there that will help you maybe get a little extra points, so you could actually get over 100% on this quiz. All right, let's go over some of the things that you will see on this quiz. All right, we discussed, first of all, we discussed the intertestamental period time. We talked about the 400 silent years between the Old and the New Testament. We talked about during that time certain religious institutions were established, buildings such as synagogues were built, and that was a place for the Jews to be able to worship when they didn't have a temple during the Babylonian captivity. We talked about the different religious groups that came on the scene during the New Testament that were not part of the Old Testament. We talked about the scribes, who were copyists and interpreters of the Old Testament. The Pharisees were the religious fundamentalists of the day. They believed in miracles. They believed in the resurrection of the dead. And then we said the Sadducees, who were the religious liberals of the day. They did not believe in miracles. They did not believe in the resurrection, which is why they were sad, don't you see? You might think that's funny, but you will remember that on the quiz, all right? Then the Herodians. They were a political party who basically defended Herod, and anybody that seemed to be a rival against Herod, they would oppose. And then we talked about the Zealots, who were an extremist group that would do terrorist acts, really, against the Roman Empire to fight for theocracy and those kind of things, all right? We also mentioned that the Israel had a ruling body, you might call it their Supreme Court or their governing body, called the Sanhedrin, made up of 71 members. And we talked about during that intertestamental period, there was really the Holy Land was being fought over by two different parts of the Grecian Empire, the Syrian Empire and the Egyptian Empire. We did talk about one specific Syrian king that he is called the Antichrist of the Old Testament, and that is Antiochus Epiphanes. Of course, he's called that because he committed the abomination of desolation and sacrificed a pig on the altar in the temple there. As a result of his ruling, there rose up a group of freedom fighters who fought for the independence of Israel, and they were called the Maccabees. And they did eventually get independence for Israel up until the point in which the Roman Empire conquered them. We mentioned a few different prophecies, all right, that were fulfilled of Christ in the Old Testament. We talked about Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, which tells us that Christ was born of a virgin. We talked about Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, that said that the child who would be born would sit on the throne of David and rule forever. We talked about Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 19, that the Messiah would be a prophet like Moses, who would speak directly for God. And then we mentioned Micah 5:2, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. We mentioned as well the different writers of the New Testament books. We talked about some of the special ones there. Of course, Matthew was a tax collector. Mark was a servant and a missionary. Luke was a physician. John and Peter, a few of those other guys were fishermen. We mentioned Paul, he was a tent maker. All right, and we mentioned, of course, James being the half-brother of Jesus as well. And then we talked about the different four Gospels. And, of course, when we talk about that section, we're talking about a matching section on the quiz. We mentioned the different viewpoints, and you'll want to know the viewpoints for sure. Matthew sees Christ as King and Messiah. Mark sees Christ as a servant. Luke sees Christ as the Son of Man. And John sees Christ as the Son of God. We also mentioned the four different audiences. All right, Matthew was written to the Jews. Mark was written to the Romans. Luke was written to the Greeks. And John was written to the world. We mentioned, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were the synoptic gospels, and they talk a lot about the ministry in Galilee, while John is called the autopic gospel, and it mentions Christ's ministry in Judea, his early ministry. It's also John's gospel that mentions the three Passovers, which helps us know that his ministry lasted for 3 years, the ministry of Christ. And it's also John who gives us large discourses of Christ, but doesn't say anything about the parables of Christ. Then we talked a little bit about the book of Matthew. We did not finish the book of Matthew, but there is a little bit of the book of Matthew on the test. Of course, we talked about the different lineages. Of course, the lineage of Matthew was found, that was the lineage coming from David through Solomon. That was the kingly lineage. And that was Joseph's line. And of course, so we also mentioned that Jesus was related to David through another son named Nathan, and that was through Mary's line. And it was important that Christ to have both lineages because he is to be the king of Israel, so he had to come through Solomon's line. But he could not be blood related to Solomon's line because of the curse of Jaconias. And we mentioned that's why he is also related to David through his son Nathan. We mentioned, of course, Christ being the king had a forerunner named John the Baptist. He's the voice of one crying in the wilderness, the messenger from Malachi chapter 3. And we mentioned a pretty unique thing that happened at the end of Malachi, where the prophecy, the last prophecy of the Old Testament, was that Elijah would come before the second coming of Christ. And of course, we mentioned that Jesus initially said to the Jews that John the Baptist could fulfill Elijah's role in that prophecy. John the Baptist dressed like Elijah. He looked like Elijah. He preached like Elijah. He preached the same sermon as Elijah. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And yet Jesus told Israel, look, if you'll accept me now, all right, if you'll accept me, this can be Elijah for to come. We talked about what if they would have. It would have been an amazing thing for Israel. And yet, unfortunately, they did not. And of course, after John the Baptist was killed by Herod, that opportunity was gone. We mentioned the fact that, of course, Jesus, after that event, after the death of John the Baptist, met with Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, talked about his coming. And of course, his coming would have been delayed at that point now because, of course, they did not accept him as their king and their Messiah. And of course, that was already prophesied. But we did mention the fact that Elijah will come someday. And we mentioned the fact that it is very likely that Elijah and probably Moses will be one of the two witnesses that will take place, will come before Jesus comes back in the second coming. Well, I believe that is a good smattering of the things that are found on the quiz. I think for the most part, we've covered everything that is on the quiz. So if you'll take time to really study, you can do well on this very first quiz. Praying for you. Looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday. God bless.